Hey guys, tonight we journey somewhere different. Imagine this, it's pitch black outside, the stars barely peeking behind a blanket of mist, and somewhere in the cold distance, a bell clangs. Loud, ancient, and entirely inconsiderate of the fact that it's barely 3 a.m. You bolt upright in a narrow wooden cot stuffed with straw that's more prickly than plush, wrapped in a woolen blanket that smells faintly of wet sheep and incense. That bell? That's your new alarm clock. There's no snooze button, no gentle sunrise simulation, just the medieval monastery's ironclad call to prayer. And yes, this is happening every day. Forever. Your breath fogs in front of you. It's freezing. The stone walls around you are damp, unforgiving, and aggressively gray. Your bare feet touch the floor and, ah yes, the first existential crisis of the day. That floor could chill soup. You shuffle to your robes, which offer roughly the same thermal protection as a wet napkin. Your entire body wants to scream nope, but instead you clumsily wrap yourself up like a reluctant burrito and stumble out into the corridor. There's no light except a flickering torch ahead. It's not creepy, exactly. It's just hauntingly ascetic. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The hallway echoes with coughs and the scuffing of other monk feet. Everyone's awake. Sort of. You're trying to follow the line of brothers headed to the church, but you can't help wondering what would happen if you just went back to bed. Spoiler, probably eternal damnation. Or, more immediately, public shaming and extra turnip weeding duty. You arrive at the cold, echoing chapel where candlelight flickers against stained glass that you can't even appreciate in the dark. This is Matins, the first of 7 daily prayer sessions. You kneel on a hard wooden bench, trying not to wince. Everyone starts chanting in Latin, of course. And while you didn't exactly download Gregorian chants for dummies before arriving, you do your best to mumble along. Most of the words sound like things you'd name IKEA furniture. Here's the fun historical fact. Benedictine monks, those hardcore trailblazers of monastic misery, structured their entire lives around the rule of Saint Benedict, which called for praying 8 times a day, including the dreaded matins in the wee hours. Why? Because spiritual warfare doesn't sleep, apparently. Now, an odd little tidbit. Some monasteries used candle clocks to measure the night watch periods. So yes, someone's job was literally to watch wax melt and scream when the prayer time came. Imagine being the medieval version of an alarm app. Historians still argue whether the sleep deprivation was spiritually enlightening or just a really effective way to keep monks too exhausted to question anything. You try to stay upright, eyes drooping, repeating the same psalm over and over. Your stomach growls, your knees hurt, and you're starting to understand that this is just the warm-up. The prayers end not with applause, not even with a gentle, "you did great," but with a slow, solemn exit through an archway that smells faintly of beeswax and damp limestone. You follow the line of brothers again, your feet dragging like you're auditioning for the role of exhausted monk number 4. The hallway outside the chapel is still dark, no sunrise yet. Time has no meaning here, just bells. And that's when it hits you. Your feet are freezing. Not ha-ha, chilly toes cold. No, they're medieval monastery stone floor cold, which, as it turns out, is a distinct kind of soul-sapping chill, See, shoes aren't exactly encouraged for monks. Humility is the goal. So you're barefoot, or maybe in simple leather sandals if you're lucky, and every step feels like walking on frozen regrets. You shuffle toward the lavatorium, a room dedicated to washing your hands before the next ritual. But here's the kicker. The water is kept in a basin carved into stone, open to the air all night long. So it's basically glacial. You dip your fingers in and immediately consider crying, except emotional outbursts aren't very monkish. Instead, you suck in a sharp breath and whisper a prayer to Saint Frostbite. The robe doesn't help. It's itchy, heavy, and woolen, and somehow always manages to hang damp no matter how long it's been drying. As you trudge through the corridor, your feet numb, you start to wonder what terrible decisions in your past life led you here. Maybe it was that time you made fun of someone's lute solo. Here's a bit of monastic trivia to chew on while your toes go numb. Monks were forbidden to sleep in beds with mattresses. Instead, they used hard wooden planks or simple straw pallets, emphasizing discipline, not comfort. Some even slept fully clothed, just in case the bell summoned them at odd hours. Spoiler alert, it always does. And here's the quirky detail of the day. In some orders, monks weren't allowed to wipe their noses during service. Not with their sleeves, not with a handkerchief. Just let that stuff hang out and offer it up, as they'd say. A true test of spiritual fortitude and sinuses. There's still no talking allowed, which makes this moment even more absurd. You desperately want to ask someone how they deal with the frost-nipped toes, or how they manage not to scream every time they splash holy icicles onto their face. But instead, you silently mirror the other monks, dipping hands, drying on coarse linen, and moving on like half-asleep penguins in itchy bathrobes. Historians still argue whether the extreme discomfort was meant to encourage enlightenment, or if the architects just had a sadistic sense of humor when designing these ice palaces of worship. You step out into the courtyard briefly as the procession turns. The sky is just barely turning a lighter shade of void, and a single bird chirps like it's mocking you. Your robe flaps in the breeze, offering no protection. You try to center yourself with a deep breath, and manage instead to inhale the pungent scent of sheep wool, pine smoke, and something faintly turnip adjacent. You thought this would be spiritual. So far, it's just chilly, itchy, and vaguely moist.
You finally make it to the choir stalls. Rows of worn wooden seats line either side of the chapel, carved just deeply enough to make sitting almost possible. Almost. You slide into your place, trying not to make noise, trying not to let your frozen knees crack like a dropped soup pot. Around you, the brothers are already flipping through thick, leather-bound chant books, some scrawled by hand with the most unhelpfully decorative Gothic script. Hope you paid attention during Medieval Latin 101, because the show's about to begin. A voice clears, a pitch is hummed, and then, like something out of a very solemn, very sleepy musical, the monks begin to chant. You try to join in, and immediately regret it. Because here's the thing, Gregorian chant isn't just singing, it's a discipline. A slow, measured intonation that requires breath control, posture, and, ideally, knowledge of what the Latin words actually mean. You hum along, mouthing what might be Deus, but could also be Deus, and pray no one notices. Spoiler, Brother Thomas, 2 stalls down, absolutely notices. He side-eyes you with the stern resignation of someone who has survived 15 winters and a lice outbreak without breaking his vow of silence. You mouth sorry and consider becoming invisible. Historically speaking, these early morning chants were considered essential spiritual warfare. Songs meant to protect the community from evil, sanctify the day, and keep everyone too busy and tired to commit any interesting sins. Monasteries didn't just do music, they were music. Daily liturgical rhythm was the heartbeat of the cloister. In some wealthier abbeys, music practice took up almost as much time as farming, writing, or praying, because heaven apparently has strict audition standards. And now for your quirky monastic tidbit of the morning. Some choir masters were so strict about pronunciation that they'd make novices recite vowels over bowls of water to ensure they didn't disrupt the surface with their breath. Yes, splashy Latin syllables equal penance. You struggle to find the rhythm, trying to remember if Dominus comes before or after that weird string of ius endings, but it's hard when your brain still thinks it's 3:41 a.m. and your stomach is already wondering when stale bread might appear again in your life. You try to focus on the melody. It's simple, repetitive, kind of pretty in a droning, ancient way, like the musical equivalent of a lava lamp, soothing, but also sort of hypnotic. The chant ends. There's a brief moment of stillness, as if the stone walls themselves are holding their breath. Then a bell again. You wince. Pavlov would be proud. Historians still argue whether the sheer repetition of chants was meant to induce divine tranquility or just guaranteed nobody had the mental energy left to plot a monastery escape. Either way, your brain is now a soup of syllables and second-hand holiness. And just as you're starting to feel the peace of it all, someone sneezes loudly, like a spiritual cannon shot. The echo is majestic, and no one reacts, because here, even bodily functions must respect the rhythm of the rule. You file out of the chapel again, like a line of medieval zombies in wool. Outside, a faint haze of silver coats the courtyard. Sunrise, or at least a committed attempt at one. A rooster crows somewhere. You're not sure if it's signaling morning or just mocking your lack of sleep. Either way, you're now allowed to think the unthinkable: breakfast. But don't get too excited. This isn't your average rise and shine buffet with fresh fruit, steaming coffee, and golden pancakes stacked like edible architecture. Oh no, this is monastic breakfast. And it's more of a reminder that food is not meant to be enjoyed, but endured. You shuffle into the refectory, a long, echoing hall lined with wooden benches. A large crucifix looms at one end like it's judging your stomach for growling. The brothers sit, hands folded, eyes downward. No one talks, because even now, especially now, silence is sacred. Instead, someone reads aloud from scripture while everyone else chews like contemplative cows. A bowl is placed in front of you. It's warm. That's the good news. The bad news? It's porridge. Sort of. Technically, it qualifies as gruel, which is a word that has never meant anything good. It's grayish, slightly lumpy, and has the consistency of regret. You dip your spoon in, take a bite, and try to convince yourself it's comforting. Like oatmeal, or wallpaper paste with a backstory. You get a hunk of bread, too. Coarse, dry, and a dental hazard. Some monasteries were known to age their loaves for days, letting them go slightly stale for better digestion, or maybe just to prevent anyone from enjoying it. Even crumbs feel like a luxury. Historically, monks followed strict dietary rules, often avoiding meat entirely except on major feast days. The Benedictine rule prescribed 2 cooked dishes per day and banned eating to satiety. Translation? You get just enough food to keep you standing, if that. Depending on the season, meals could be lighter, especially during Lent. Spoiler alert, everything in a monastery feels like Lent. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some abbeys, they brewed monastic beer that was thicker than soup and practically a meal. Some monks secretly relied on it to bulk up calories without technically breaking fast. Honestly, it sounds like the original protein shake, minus the blender. Or the joy. And just to keep things medieval, you're not allowed to look around while eating. Eyes down, silent chewing. It's like eating in a very strict library that smells like turnips and wax. You finish the gruel, unsure if you're full or just too tired to remember what hunger feels like. A bell rings again. Another brother reads a final line of scripture, and everyone rises at once. Bowed heads, crossed arms, marching orders. Historians still argue whether these meals were meant to purify the body and soul, or if they were just strategically bland to prevent any post-breakfast dance parties. As you leave, you can't help but think of pancakes. Golden, fluffy pancakes, with syrup and butter. And then you trip over a step and land back in the cold, hard present, where pancakes are sin, and you still have 5 prayers, 6 chores, and 0 snacks to go.
You're barely out of the refectory when a wiry monk, probably named Brother something biblical, presses a shovel into your hand with the gentle enthusiasm of someone handing over a sacred relic. Laborare est orare, he mutters. You don't speak Latin fluently yet, but the message is clear. Work is prayer. And today, you're about to pray a lot. Your assigned task? The compost pile. You follow the gravel path, past the garden, past the chicken coops, past a bench that looks deceptively inviting. Don't even think about it. There are eyes everywhere. Monks may not talk, but they observe. And you, friend, are about to become one with medieval muck. The compost heap is everything you feared. Steaming, sour-smelling, and suspiciously active. It's a bubbling pile of discarded vegetable scraps, straw, and, how to put this delicately, divine droppings. The night soil from the latrines ends up here too. Holy refuse, if you will. You jam the shovel into the pile. It squelches in a way that makes your soul flinch. Steam rises. The scent hits you. Cabbage gone wrong, spiritual suffering, and something vaguely like old cheese. You gag a little, but Brother Compost has already vanished, leaving you alone with your penance. This is your spiritual exercise for the day. You shovel, you turn, you breathe through your mouth, which you immediately regret. A chicken nearby watches you with what can only be described as judgment. You start to hum one of those morning chants, but even your own voice sounds like it's mocking you. Historically, manual labor was seen as not just a necessity, but a virtue in monasteries. Under the rule of Saint Benedict, every monk was expected to work with their hands, farming, cleaning, crafting, and yes, composting. No task was too lowly. Work, after all, helped ward off idleness, the devil's workshop, which, in this case, probably smelled better. And here's your delightful quirk of the day. In some monasteries, monks had specific penance chores for small transgressions. Talked during silence, enjoy extra manure duty. Took more than your share of lentils, welcome to latrine scrubbing. Sins came with real-world consequences, very squishy ones. You pause to wipe your brow and realize there's no towel, just your sleeve, which is now a tapestry of regret. As you scoop and turn, and try not to dwell on what's squishing beneath your sandals, you start to get philosophical. Is this humility? Is this holiness? Or is this just a particularly cruel escape room without a time limit? Historians still argue whether these chores were truly embraced as spiritual disciplines, or if monks simply developed an industrial strength poker face to mask their internal screaming. After what feels like a week, but is probably 30 minutes, a bell rings in the distance. Relief. Time for the next activity. You straighten up, back aching, hands filthy, and soul slightly soiled. You trudge back toward the cloister walk, hoping for anything that doesn't involve fermented waste. But deep down, you know, it's only getting worse from here.
You wipe your hands on your robe, which somehow makes everything worse, and start the slow trek back toward the main building. A few other monks pass by, eyes cast downward, arms tucked neatly into their sleeves like silent Jedi. You instinctively want to say something, maybe a polite hello, or more urgently, "Do I still smell like compost?" But you stop yourself. Because here, talking isn't just discouraged, it's basically illegal. Welcome to the Great Silence. No, it's not just a dramatic name for a post-apocalyptic novel. It's a real rule. In many medieval monasteries, the hours after evening prayers and sometimes even entire daylight stretches were governed by strict silence. Only essential speech was allowed, and even that had to be whispered or performed with a collection of hand signals that frankly look like interpretive dance meets mime school. And don't even think about laughter. Humor is apparently stored in the cellar, right next to the wine you're also not allowed to drink. As you pass through the cloister, the silence presses on you like another wool blanket, but one that smothers instead of warms. Your thoughts get louder. Your stomach rumbles like it's trying to speak in your place. You spot Brother Stephen, the elder monk, with the permanent squint and the gait of someone who's definitely memorized the entire Psalter. He gives you the briefest nod. You try to nod back respectfully. He frowns. Oops, that was too enthusiastic. You might as well have thrown a peace sign and said, "Yo, my guy." Now you're wondering if you've just earned extra prayer duty. The historical fact for the hour: the vow of silence was often misunderstood. While most monks didn't take a literal vow of silence, they lived under rules that demanded minimal speech to preserve focus and humility. Talking too much could lead to vanity, after all. And what's worse than a vain monk? According to some abbots, nothing. Now for your weird little fringe tidbit. Some monasteries had talking corridors, narrow walkways where conversation was briefly permitted for practical tasks. But step outside the zone, boom, back to spiritual mute mode. Imagine needing to whisper about the bee swarm in the apothecary garden and realizing you're 3 inches outside the holy chat zone. That's a one-way ticket to repentance. You enter the chapter house, where the abbot is reading aloud the day's lesson. You have no idea what he's saying. It's Latin again. But everyone is nodding with the kind of slow, reverent gravity that suggests enlightenment. You fake it. Nod, pause, nod again. Like you're at a dinner party pretending to understand French cinema. Historians still argue whether the silence was a deeply spiritual practice that enhanced introspection, or just a clever way to avoid listening to Brother Felix complain about his sandals again. Your mind wanders. You start composing an entire imaginary conversation about how you accidentally insulted Brother Stephen by nodding too hard. In your head, it ends with a heartfelt hug and an apology. In reality, it ends with you smacking your knee on the edge of a wooden bench because you weren't paying attention. No scream, just silent agony. You're really getting the hang of this. The abbot finishes reading. Everyone rises in synchronized silence, and you shuffle off with the others toward a narrow hall that smells faintly of ink, dust, and long-abandoned ambition. Welcome to the scriptorium, the place where books are born, or at least slowly copied until your hand cramps into a claw and your eyes start inventing new Latin letters. You step inside and blink. Rows of narrow desks, each lit by high windows or sputtering candles, stretch across the long chamber. It's oddly beautiful, in a library meets prison cell kind of way. A few monks are already hard at work, heads bowed over parchment, the only sound the soft scratch, scratch, scratch of quills against calfskin. Yes, calfskin. That's what parchment was made from. You try not to think about it too hard as someone places a fresh sheet in front of you and hands you a writing tool that looks suspiciously like a goose feather's fancier cousin. Copy exactly, someone whispers. No errors. No pressure. You dip your quill into the ink pot, take a breath, and begin tracing the first ornate letter. It's not so bad, you think, until you realize there are hundreds more to go, and one mistake could mean you have to scrape the surface clean and start again, with a knife. Like medieval whiteout, but with more stabbing. Historically, the scriptorium was where the monastery's intellectual labor took place. Monks weren't just farmers and prayers on repeat, they were scribes, tasked with preserving ancient texts and creating new copies of the Bible, saints' lives, theological treatises, and occasionally something spicy, like herbal remedies and bestiaries featuring murderous hedgehogs. A single book could take months, sometimes years to complete. You glance down at your own page. Your letters are wobbly. Not charmingly so, more like, did a nervous squirrel do this? Your ink blots bleed into your awkward Latin, and you sneeze, smudging everything south of the word Gloria. You freeze. No one moves. A single candle flickers in judgment. Then a monk 2 seats over delicately holds up a piece of chalk, used to fix guidelines, and sighs just loud enough to shame you without technically breaking the vow of silence. And here's your quirky detail of the day. In some scriptoriums, if a monk made too many errors, he could be assigned to copying index entries only for months as penance. Yes, nothing but page 49, lentils. Page 82, repentance. Page 120, lentils again. You press on. Your back starts to ache. Your wrist goes numb. You develop a twitch in your left eye that feels deeply unholy. The letters blur. Someone lights more candles. Time loses all meaning. Your page looks less like a sacred manuscript and more like a ransom note from someone with seasonal allergies. Historians still argue whether the meticulous copying was truly a meditative practice or just medieval busywork with a divine label slapped on top. You glance at the monk across from you. His work is perfect. Illuminated letters, tiny golden flourishes, angels practically breakdancing in the margins. You hate him a little. And then finally, a bell rings in the distance. You drop your quill with the exhausted flair of a Renaissance rock star and vow never to write again, at least not until after lunch.
You rise from your scriptorium desk, every vertebrae cracking like a creaky monastery door. Your knees are noodles, your eyes are sandpaper, and your back feels like it's aged 3 decades in 3 hours. Time for a brief reprieve, right? Maybe a breather, a walk, a change into something cozier. Wrong. It's time to fully appreciate what you're wearing. Let's talk about your robe, specifically the woolen, scratchy, humidity-trapping beast of a garment clinging to your limbs like a damp carpet with abandonment issues. You're starting to understand why saints always looked mildly uncomfortable in those stained glass windows. Monastic fashion was never about flair. It was about function, barely, and humility. Most monks wore simple habits, usually brown, gray, or black, depending on the order. Yours, an all-season, one-piece miracle of medieval misery made from unlined wool that smells like it spent the night on a wet barn floor. As you step outside into the weak daylight, you feel the robe shift, sticking in all the wrong places. The rope belt, called a cincture, is tied tightly enough to hold up your spiritual resolve, but not much else.
The hood is decorative, unless your idea of functionality includes blocking 80% of your peripheral vision. Then there's the tunic underneath. It's shorter, stiffer, and yes, just as itchy. Paired with your complete lack of socks and the open-air sandals that double as foot exfoliators, it creates a look you generously describe as austere Jedi meets allergic reaction. Here's your daily dose of history. In the 12th century, the Cistercian order doubled down on monastic dress codes, banning even minor adornments like colored thread or slightly luxurious fabric. The goal? Absolute uniformity. No frills, no fun, no individuality. You weren't supposed to stand out. You were supposed to disappear into your vocation like a very itchy ghost. But for your quirky tidbit, some monasteries had robe rotation systems, shared clothing that was laundered rarely and worn by many. Imagine a take a robe, leave a robe box, but none of them ever got washed properly. You start to suspect your robe's last owner was either very sweaty or secretly part goat. You scratch your elbow discreetly, then your knee, then, oh, never mind, it's everywhere. The itching is now a spiritual trial. Historians still argue whether the discomfort of monastic dress was truly meant to inspire humility or if medieval monks just collectively agreed never to invent linen underwear. You pass a mirror, well, a polished metal plate nailed to the wall, and catch your reflection. You look haunted, but in a pious way. Hair tousled, cheeks slightly ashen, lips dry from hours of vow-bound dehydration. A medieval fashion influencer, you are not. But then again, this isn't about looking good. It's about shedding vanity, enduring discomfort, and learning to scratch internally. Or maybe that's not spiritual advice. Maybe that's just what you tell yourself to survive this wool-wrapped existence. Either way, you're not changing outfits. Not tomorrow, not next week, not until that robe actually walks off your body and files for retirement.
You're sent to the chapel again, as usual, for another round of kneeling, chanting, and thinking about your sins. But today, the energy feels off. You notice a few monks avoiding eye contact. One of them walks in barefoot, not for humility, but because he left his sandals outside as penance. Another kneels with an odd stiffness and winces slightly as he shifts. That's when you see it. The leather scourge tucked beneath his sleeve. Welcome to the wild world of self-flagellation. You sit quietly in your choir stall, trying not to attract attention, but your curiosity is already awake. One monk kneels in the front row, silently reciting a psalm while methodically swiping a multi-tailed whip across his own back beneath his robe. No moaning, no dramatics, just the quiet rhythm of repentance through pain. And this isn't even the weird part of your day yet. See, medieval monks took their pursuit of purity seriously. Some practiced self-flagellation regularly, not just during Lent, but as a daily tool to suppress temptation, humble the body, and seek forgiveness. The flagellum, usually made of knotted leather cords, was their not-so-gentle reminder that the flesh was weak and needed frequent persuasion. Your instinct says, this is extreme. But to them, this was ordinary, a Tuesday. Historically, penance was seen as the physical response to spiritual failure. Ate too much lentil soup? Flagellate. Laughed when Brother Peter tripped over his robe? Extra psalms and a few lashes. Looked too long at Sister Benedicta during her weekly herb delivery? Whew, better clear your calendar. And here's today's quirk. Some monks went even further. They wore hair shirts, garments woven with coarse animal hair, worn under the robe to irritate the skin constantly. Imagine an itchy sweater designed by your worst enemy. Now imagine you wear it every day, on purpose, for God. You wonder if your robe counts, because it's definitely still itchy. You try to keep your eyes ahead, your breathing slow,
your posture correct, but your thoughts betray you. You start wondering what sin you might have committed. You thought about pancakes during morning prayer. You nodded too hard earlier. And yes, there was that one moment in the scriptorium where you mentally referred to Brother Illuminated Manuscript as a smug parchment peacock. So, naturally, your brain whispers, maybe you deserve a little penance too. You glance around. A few others are clutching cords in their sleeves. No one makes a show of it. It's private, purposeful, almost meditative. You shift in your seat, feeling the slight pinch of your rope belt. Is that enough suffering for the day? Probably not. But baby steps. Historians still argue whether self-flagellation was sincerely believed to draw monks closer to God, or if it was just a sanctioned outlet for internalized guilt and repressed frustration. Either way, it was part of the rhythm. Pain and prayer, flesh and faith. You shuffle out at the end of the session, rubbing your lower back out of sheer empathy. Behind you, the faint thwop, thwop of repentance continues in the dark. And honestly, you're starting to understand it. Not agree exactly, but understand.
You exit the chapel into the early evening chill, body heavy with the kind of tired that's more spiritual than physical. Although, let's be honest, your actual limbs feel like they've been through a medieval obstacle course. The sky is bruising into twilight now, shades of violet and gray settling over the stone cloister like a weighted blanket. You'd think the day was winding down. You'd be wrong. Because it's time for Vespers, another round of chanting, kneeling, and pretending your stomach isn't composing its own sorrowful lament. You trudge back to the church. The cold's a little sharper now, and your robe does what it always does, traps the moisture, ignores the warmth. Inside, the chapel glows dimly, candles flickering in iron sconces, casting long shadows that make the monks look even more ghost-like than usual. You slide into your choir stall, the same one, again. You know every notch in the wood, every creak of the floor beneath it. You swear there's one loose splinter that always finds your left thigh. The chanting begins, low and slow. The psalms tonight are drawn out, hypnotic. Your lips move, but your mind, it's drifting. You're thinking of warmth, of food, of anything that isn't this persistent, gnawing ache. Because here's the thing. Dinner is still a ways off, and it's going to be, let's say, underwhelming. So for now, you sit there, slowly melting into the wood, trying to look devout while your body runs on fumes. Here's your historical truth bomb for the evening. Vespers was one of the most important prayer hours of the day, marking the beginning of nightfall. Monks gathered to offer thanksgiving, prepare for the darkness, and often chant the Magnificat. This was their rhythm, their clock, each prayer marking a shift in the spiritual sky. Now for your quirky tidbit, some monasteries were so cautious about nutrition and asceticism that they classified vegetables into light and heavy categories. Too many root vegetables, risk of indulgence. A turnip too far, as it were. Some abbeys banned garlic because it inflamed the passions, which is both adorable and completely terrifying. Your stomach, meanwhile, isn't inflamed, it's just hollow. You haven't had meat in weeks, dairy in months, and the closest thing to a treat was that one time Brother Paul left raisins in the barley soup. You still think about those raisins. You chant, you kneel, you stand, you chant again. The words blur together now. Your lips move automatically, like muscle memory for the soul. Around you, the brothers are steady, consistent, eerily synchronized, and you, somewhere between pious and perishing. Historians still argue whether the physical deprivation of the monastic lifestyle created a deeper connection to the divine or just dulled the senses enough to make transcendence feel like a nap with extra steps. Eventually, the final note fades into the ceiling beams, and the bell sounds. You rise slowly, joints creaking in protest, your head light from fasting, and your feet numb from prayer posture acrobatics. You look outside. The sky's dark now. The wind picks up slightly. It carries the scent of smoke, earth, and, if you're not hallucinating, maybe soup? You hope it's not turnip again. But deep down, you already know.
You shuffle out of the chapel, stomach rumbling like some ancient bellows, and just when you think you're finally heading toward a dinner that will disappoint you in entirely predictable ways, Brother Matthew beckons you aside. He has the calm smile of a man who knows something you don't, something ominous. "Follow me," he whispers. You obey, because let's face it, your survival rate without help is hovering somewhere near zero. He leads you through a side passage you hadn't noticed before. Low ceiling, dust-mottled stone, and the faint scent of soap? That's either promising or very, very bad. You descend a narrow staircase and step into a chamber lit by one candle and a lot of tension. In the center sits a stool, a bowl, and a blade. Oh no, it's time for the tonsure. You knew it was coming. You just didn't think it would be today, or that it would involve Brother Matthew wielding a razor with the focus of a medieval barber surgeon. He gestures for you to sit. You do, a little too quickly. The stool wobbles. Let's back up a bit. The tonsure was the traditional haircut of monks, a circle of shaved scalp on top of the head, leaving a thin ring of hair around the sides. Symbolically, it represented humility, renunciation, and spiritual death to the world. Practically, it made you look like a medieval satellite dish. And there's no hiding it. It's like a forehead billboard that says, "I gave up everything, including hair logic." Brother Matthew dips the blade into the water, lifts it toward your head, and begins shaving. No mirror, no words, just soft scrape, 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 and the occasional flake of hair drifting past your nose like sad confetti. He's careful, methodical. You suspect he's done this hundreds of times, maybe thousands. Here's your quirky tidbit. Not all tonsures were created equal. There were several regional styles. The Roman tonsure, your fate, was the classic bald crown. The Celtic tonsure an ear-to-ear like a bizarre medieval headband, and the Eastern Orthodox monks skipped tonsures entirely, probably to maintain some shred of dignity. Brother Matthew keeps shaving. At one point he hums quietly, a soft Gregorian tune, which under any other circumstance might be comforting. You just focus on breathing. The room's cold, the stool creaks. You feel your dignity being lathered away, inch by inch. Historians still argue whether the tonsure truly symbolized spiritual humility or whether it simply made monks easier to identify in a crowd of wool and piety. Eventually, the scraping stops. Brother Matthew steps back. No mirror is offered, but you don't need one. You can feel the breeze on your scalp. You raise your hand, slowly, and touch the freshly bald circle. Yep, that's your hair now. Well, was your hair. You stand, thank Brother Matthew with a solemn nod, and start the slow ascent back toward the refectory. Every step feels lighter, not spiritually, just aerodynamically. You pass another novice who catches your eye and stifles a grin. You briefly consider revenge via cold porridge sabotage. But no, this is your life now. Itchy robes, cold feet, empty stomach, and the worst haircut of the Middle Ages. At least you're finally in uniform. By the time you make it back to the refectory, your scalp is cold, your pride is gone, and your expectations are, well, appropriately medieval. Dinner is being served, or more accurately, allocated. There's no tuck in and help yourself energy here. Instead, a silent line of monks shuffles forward like a choir of slightly damp ghosts, each receiving a wooden bowl and a wooden spoon like the prizes they never wanted. You reach the front. The serving monk glances at your freshly sheared scalp, gives a nod that says, "Welcome to the bald side," and ladles something into your bowl. It is gray and steaming and possibly edible. You trudge to your bench and sit down, bowl in front of you, spoon in hand. No one speaks. The only sound is the creak of benches and the soft drone of another monk reading aloud from a holy text in the corner. You take a breath, scoop up a spoonful of dinner, and taste it. It's lentils. Again. But it's not just lentils. No, that would be too luxurious. It's lentils, overcooked until they surrender all texture, combined with mystery root vegetables that may or may not be legally food. Somewhere in there is a sliver of garlic, unless that's just your imagination staging a rebellion. And the bread? Still stale. Somehow more stale than this morning's hunk. You knock it gently against the bench. Yep, could be used to hammer nails. Historically, most monasteries maintained strict dietary rules based on humility, health, and religious discipline. Meat was rare, usually forbidden altogether unless a monk was sick. Meals were simple, seasonal, and dictated by what could be grown, stored, or begged. Lentils, beans, leeks, and turnips reigned supreme. Spices, a luxury. Butter, occasionally. Cheese, if the cow had a good week. But here's your delightful tidbit of the evening. Some monks believed that eating too much hot food, especially soup, could stimulate impure thoughts, which may explain why this bowl is lukewarm at best and aggressively uninspiring. You chew slowly, listening to the gospel reading drone on. It's soothing, in a sort of no choice but to zen out way. Occasionally, you glance around. No one makes eye contact, everyone eats in synchronized humility. Even the chewing sounds spiritual somehow. You wonder if chewing too loudly is a sin. Halfway through your bowl, you're full? Or maybe just bored. It's hard to tell. You finish out of habit more than hunger, then fold your hands and stare ahead, trying to look contemplative and not like someone mentally listing the many ways you miss pizza. Historians still argue whether these intentionally bland meals created clarity of mind and spiritual detachment, or whether they were simply a result of budget-friendly agricultural logistics wrapped in divine justification. A bell rings, low and slow. Everyone stands. A prayer is offered. You bow your head, mumble something vaguely Latin, and clutch your stomach, which is already wondering when it will next taste something that doesn't resemble medieval wallpaper paste. As you file out, you pass the kitchen. You catch a glimpse of the cook stirring another vat of lentils and humming a hymn, blissfully unaware that your soul just quietly wept. And tomorrow? Lentils again. Of course. The refectory empties with the quiet shuffle of well-practiced misery. You follow the line of monks down the corridor, your stomach now comfortably full of gray mush and spiritual resignation. But just when you think the silence will end, and maybe, just maybe, you'll be allowed to say something normal, like that soup tasted like damp parchment, you're funneled right back into a fresh round of quiet intensity. It's still mealtime, technically, but now it's time for table silence. And not just the passive, everyone minding their own business kind. No, this silence is a fully choreographed affair, complete with rules, punishments, and, get ready, hand signals. You return to the refectory, not to eat, but to help with cleanup. It's your rotation, apparently. There's no actual announcement, of course. You just receive a stern look from Brother Paul and a swift point at a stack of crusty bowls. Welcome to dish duty. You begin scraping the dried lentil paste out of the bowls into a pail that smells like Monday's sins, trying to ignore the way your fingers feel after scrubbing with cold water and medieval soap, which, by the way, is just ash and lye with a bad attitude. Around you, monks communicate only in gestures. A flat palm means pass that dish. A circle traced in the air is more water. And a pointed finger followed by a dramatic shoulder shrug? That's probably, why is this turnip so aggressive? But you're still new to this, so when Brother Hubert wiggles 3 fingers in your direction, you panic. Is that, I need a towel? Or, you are an affront to the Benedictine rule? You nod. He frowns. You hand him a bowl. He sighs. You are not thriving. Here's your historical nugget. Many monasteries developed detailed systems of non-verbal communication to maintain silence during meals. These signals were standardized, sometimes even documented in monastic manuals. Some orders had over 200 gestures. Imagine a game of spiritual charades played with deadly seriousness. And the quirky bit? In some places, gestures were so specific that there was a designated sign for "please pass the garlic" and a completely different one for "pass the garlic, but only if it's a feast day." You live in constant fear of accidentally asking for onions during Lent. You finish your dishes without making any more diplomatic blunders, then wipe down the table with a cloth that smells like 20 years of penance. Your arms ache, your scalp is still cold, and you're haunted by the possibility that Brother Hubert is plotting a polite, silent revenge. Historians still argue whether this enforced quiet promoted higher spiritual focus or just created a monkish culture of exaggerated eye contact and interpretive dance. As you file out again, you catch one last glimpse of the refectory's long tables, rows of humble bowls, benches polished by generations of woolen robes, and a silence so thick you could ladle it. Outside, the evening air hits you with a gust of cold and the faint scent of burning wood. You open your mouth to whisper something, anything, and then remember, the great silence has officially begun. Again.
You've barely stepped out into the cloister before the silence settles over your shoulders like another robe, heavier, even itchier than the one you're already wearing. The sun has gone, tucked away behind the monastery's high stone walls, and darkness creeps in, cold and quiet. You shuffle to your cell with the rest of the brothers, each one disappearing into their narrow doorway like shadows returning to their shelves. You lie on your straw-stuffed mattress. It's slightly less crunchy than it was yesterday. Either it's breaking in, or you are. Your knees throb, your back mutters complaints, and your scalp, freshly tonsured, tingles against the rough linen of your pillow like it knows something awful is about to happen. Sleep edges in, tentative and sweet, and then, clang, the bell. You jolt upright, heart hammering. You look around wildly like a fugitive from a nap. What time is it? You fumble for a candle. You don't even need to light it. The moonlight streaming through the tiny window tells you what you already fear. It's midnight. Welcome to Matins, the most merciless of prayer hours. Historically, Matins was the night office, prayers said in the dead of night when the soul was supposed to be most vulnerable and pure. The idea was to wake the body when it least wanted to be awake, forcing it to submit entirely to spiritual discipline. Because nothing says holiness like kneeling while your eyelids rebel. You shuffle out of your cell like a sleepwalker, joining the procession of half-asleep monks as they trudge back toward the chapel. No one talks, of course. There's only the scuff of sandals, the occasional cough, and the soft, awful realization that you've got another hour, at least, before you'll get to collapse again. Inside the chapel, the air is colder now. The candles glow dimmer, casting long, shaky shadows across the floor. You slide into your stall, knees bending with the grace of a collapsing bookshelf. Your head drops forward. Your chin bounces off your chest. You jerk upright again. Repeat. And here's your delightful tidbit. Some monks had to keep their hands raised during parts of matins. If they drooped, they were gently poked with a wooden stick by the wake warden. Yes, that was an actual job. A sacred midnight poking. Tonight, that might be you. You try to chant. The Latin is the same, but the syllables feel heavier in your mouth. You slur through Domine, labia, mea, aperies, like someone reciting holy text underwater. Your eyes cross. Your breath fogs. Historians still argue whether these midnight rituals brought monks closer to divine transcendence or simply simulated spiritual breakthroughs via prolonged exhaustion and mild hypothermia. Somewhere nearby, a monk lets out a deep sigh. Not dramatic, just tired, universally, soulfully tired. You nod in silent solidarity, then realize you've nodded too far and almost fall off the bench.
You catch yourself. Barely. Outside, the wind picks up. It howls around the chapel like a lost soul trying to sneak in. You focus on the rhythm of the chanting. It's slow, soothing, hypnotic. You're no longer sure if you're praying or dreaming about praying. And then, mercifully, it ends. The final bell chimes. You rise, knees creaking, and shuffle back to your cell like the world's saddest conga line. You fall into bed, curl up, and just before sleep snatches you back, you wonder, what fresh torment will the morning bring?
You awaken to the scent of something strange, leather, lime, and something unmistakably barn-adjacent. The morning light creeps in through your narrow window, barely enough to light your cell. But already you sense today is going to be a different flavor of unpleasant. You're assigned to parchment duty. You think, oh, lovely, more copying. But no, today you're not writing the books, you're preparing them. As in turning dead animal skin into blank pages. It's arts and crafts, 12th century style. Spoiler, there will be knives. Brother Godwin, small, square-shouldered, and seemingly carved from oak, hands you a flat, whitish sheet stretched taut across a wooden frame. Sheep, he says, nodding solemnly. You nod back, unsure if you're supposed to feel reverent or vaguely horrified. He gestures toward a pile of others, in various states of drying, curing, and generally smelling awful. Scrape, he says. So you do. With a curved knife, you gently pull away the last bits of hair and tissue from the parchment surface. It's a strange, squeaky sound, half papercraft, half horror film. The smell? Imagine beef jerky left in a monastery basement for 3 weeks, then blessed with vinegar. Historically, parchment was an essential but painstaking part of monastic life. Monks made their own, stretching skins onto wooden frames, scraping them smooth, and sanding them down with pumice stones. One average manuscript required dozens of these sheets, and dozens of sheep, for that matter. So every page you've seen, yeah, someone suffered for that, including you. You sit outside in the chill, scraping away, your arms slowly turning to jelly. Your robe flaps in the wind. A chicken watches you with silent judgment. And then you spot it. The communal pee bucket. Apparently, part of the curing process involves soaking skins in a mixture of lime and, well, urine. Monk urine. Collected generously, shared generously, used generously. And you, my friend, are dangerously close to knocking it over with your sandal. You scoot a few inches to the left. Fun tidbit of the day? In some monasteries, the skin prep job was given as punishment to younger monks who talked too much during meals. You wonder if they included a pee splash hazard disclaimer in orientation. You're handed another skin. This one is goat, a little tougher. You try not to think about its previous life on the hillside, bleeding peacefully, before destiny turned it into St. Matthew's biography. By midday, your hands are stiff, your nostrils have given up, and your robe is now permanently tattooed with mysterious streaks. You've reached a point of mental dissociation where your scraping rhythm feels oddly meditative. Historians still argue whether parchment making was a sacred act of preparation or just the lowest job on the holy totem pole, dump on novices with strong stomachs and bad Latin. Brother Godwin nods approvingly. You've got a good wrist for scraping, he says. You're not sure if that's praise or a threat. You finish one last sheet, hang it to dry on a line, and step back, flexing your fingers like a tortured calligrapher. The wind picks up. You smell like vinegar and barnyard. And somehow, this is still better than chanting at 3 a.m. By some divine twist of scheduling, or maybe just the slow turning of the monastic calendar, today is a feast day. You overhear it in hushed Latin during matins.
whispered like the monks are discussing a surprise party, except the surprise is more church. You feel a spark of hope, a feast day, finally. Visions dance in your mind. Steaming platters, roasted roots seasoned with something, maybe, just maybe, cheese. Or is that too decadent? You dare to dream. Perhaps music, maybe laughter. Surely God allows a good time once every season or so. Spoiler, he does not. You are summoned to the chapter house, not for merriment, but for extra sermons. That's right, on a feast day, you don't rest, you reflect, at length, with numb legs and eyes that glaze over halfway through St. Jerome's fourth letter to the Ephesians, but not really. Brother Aldred, who has the energy of 1,000 silent judgments, stands before the group and begins reading from a scroll that may or may not be older than your robe. His voice is steady, rhythmic, and, within 5 minutes, completely hypnotic. You try to focus. You really do, but your brain quietly slips out the back door and starts daydreaming about garlic. Historically, feast days in medieval monasteries were special, but only relatively speaking. You might get a second course, maybe an extra slice of bread. Some abbeys allowed cheese or even a bit of fish, but the bulk of the feasting came in the form of longer prayers, added scripture, and spiritual readings that could rival the length of small novels. And here's the ironic twist. Feast days sometimes felt harder than regular days. Why? Because you got your hopes up. And in the monastery, hope is often followed swiftly by disappointment in wool form. Today's quirky tidbit. Some monasteries had liturgical dramas on feast days, short plays performed by monks, often depicting biblical scenes. You'd think that sounds delightful, but no. These were performed in Latin, with zero humor, and often featured Brother Thomas in a painfully symbolic wig. You start to understand why these performances were phased out. Back in the chapter house, the candles burn low. You feel your head begin to nod, not out of agreement, but gravity. A sharp glance from Brother Aldred keeps you upright, barely. He's now halfway through the Rule of Benedict, detailing the correct way to receive guests, which is hilarious because you haven't seen a non-monk in days. You're not even sure you remember what other humans look like anymore. Eventually, you're dismissed, for now. You shuffle to the refectory, heart pounding in quiet anticipation. Surely, you think, something celebratory. And there it is, an extra bowl of broth, with a carrot in it. You want to cry. You want to frame that carrot and tell your grandchildren, but instead, you eat it silently while listening to a reading about St. Anthony's commitment to poverty and how he once lived in a cave with a lion. Historians still argue whether feast days were moments of holy joy or carefully portioned bursts of delayed gratification, designed to keep everyone obedient and just a little bit hungry. You finish your soup, bow your head, and murmur a silent prayer of thanks for the carrot. The great silence resumes. Your dreams tonight? They'll probably smell like broth.
You're wiping down a bench after the feast day non-feast when Brother Peter approaches you with the stealth of a man carrying secrets and maybe a mild grudge. He doesn't say anything, of course, because talking, but he gives you that look, the one that says, "It's your turn." Your turn for what, exactly? Confession. You try not to gulp audibly. He leads you to the side chapel, a small, dim room that smells like candle wax, old paper, and unresolved guilt. Inside the confessor, an elderly monk with the serene, unreadable face of someone who's heard every sin imaginable, waits in silence. He gestures for you to kneel. You do, knees creaking like a haunted violin. There's no screen between you, no curtain, just eye contact and the crushing weight of your own questionable thoughts. And now the real fun begins. Trying to remember if anything you've done counts as sinful. Do intrusive pancake thoughts count? How about mentally ranking the monks based on whose tonsure looks the least ridiculous? Oh, And you definitely imagined pushing Brother Thomas into the lentil vat when he corrected your chant pitch. That might be something. Historically, monastic confession wasn't a once-a-year Easter season kind of deal. In many orders, monks confessed weekly, sometimes even daily. The belief was that constant self-examination helped maintain humility, prevent pride, and stop small sins from turning into big, roast beef-level moral failures. You couldn't hide anything. You couldn't pretend. Everything got dragged into the light, preferably before Vespers. So you start confessing. Or guessing. I got distracted during matins. True. I judged Brother Felix for chewing loudly. Also true. I entertained a thought of cheese. Deeply, profoundly true. The confessor nods slowly, like a sommelier sampling vintage regret. He doesn't speak immediately, just lets the silence thicken like overboiled barley. Finally, he lifts a hand and offers your penance. 3 extra psalms and help in the garden tomorrow. That's it? You blink. No lashings? No oat rationing? You briefly wonder if he's gone soft. Then again, maybe he's just used to rookies like you confessing the spiritual equivalent of jaywalking. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some monasteries, monks were so unsure what counted as sin that they kept sin diaries, tiny personal records of every impure thought, selfish yawn, or second glance at a particularly nice-looking carrot. And yes, some confessed that they enjoyed music too much. Gregorian guilt is no joke. You stand, thank the confessor in a whisper, and head back toward the cloister. The sky is already darkening again. The bell will call for compline soon. And you, purified-ish, and slightly embarrassed, now carry the psychic weight of cheese desire as your great spiritual burden. Historians still argue whether this constant confession created genuine holiness or just turned everyone into sleep-deprived guilt machines with a fear of enjoying literally anything. As you kneel once more that night, you notice Brother Thomas across the chapel. He's smiling faintly. You quickly repent again, just in case.
You rise before dawn the next day, joints aching, stomach mildly rebellious after too much carrot joy, and today's task awaits with ominous simplicity: prayer, endurance. The schedule is unchanged, and that means you're heading right back to the chapel, yes, again, for the monks' version of an Olympic event: extended kneeling. You shuffle into your choir stall like a veteran of spiritual trench warfare. The wood groans beneath you, your knees groan louder. Already your body remembers yesterday's penitential routine and seems to file an official complaint. You kneel. The service begins, and the true contest begins. Because this isn't just prayer, it's a test of posture, patience, and pressure points. You are one of dozens of bowed, silent figures, all of you locked in a collective game of who can pretend this is comfortable the longest. Spoiler, not you. Within minutes, your knees are sending distress signals to every nerve in your legs. Your toes have gone numb. Your spine is folding in ways you're almost certain are unapproved by Saint Benedict. You shift your weight slightly to the left. Bad idea. Now it feels worse. You shift again. Worse still. Somehow, you have unlocked the Rosetta Stone of discomfort. You glance sideways, stealthily, of course, and see Brother Malachi, old, skeletal, with the expression of a statue that's judging you. He's kneeling perfectly. No flinching, no twitching, just serene, beatific stillness. It's infuriating. You try to mimic his posture. It lasts 3 seconds before your ankle spasms like it's been possessed by a minor demon of tendon pain. Historically, monks were expected to participate in long liturgical hours, standing or kneeling for extended periods without complaint. These weren't gentle meditative sessions, they were physical tests. No cushions, no breaks. You prayed with your whole body, or risked public correction via a disappointed glance, or worse, extra bell tower duty. Today's quirky tidbit: in some abbeys, monks had wooden prayer stools with hidden pegs underneath to discourage slouching. Sit wrong and poke, instant posture correction. You start to wonder if your bench is one of those. You wouldn't be surprised. You try to focus on the psalm. It's about endurance. Of course it is. Your chant is shaky. You're in physical distress. Your mouth is forming the words, but your brain is thinking, I will trade my soul for a pillow. You sneak another peek at Brother Malachi. Still perfect. His expression now contains a faint smile, and for a moment you're certain he knows exactly what you're going through. And worse, he's enjoying your suffering like it's part of the lesson. You try to breathe through it. Inhale, exhale. Pretend you're fluting. Instead, your left foot falls asleep with a violent tingling that makes you twitch like you've been struck by divine static. Historians still argue whether these intense prayer sessions truly built spiritual stamina or just created an elite class of monks with iron kneecaps and disturbingly high pain thresholds. Finally, the bell rings, the session ends. You rise with a groan that probably echoed off the rafters, gripping your stall for balance, legs trembling like boiled turnips. Brother Malachi nods at you as he passes, his eyes twinkling with what may have been the faintest flicker of monkish amusement. You don't cry. You simply limp, gracefully.
You've survived the kneeling trials. Barely. Your legs feel like medieval porridge. Uneven, trembling, and a little tragic. But before you can limp your way to something resembling a break, you're summoned again. Not to the fields, not to the kitchen. No, it's the library. This should be good news, right? Books, peace, the smell of old parchment and wax. But as you step into the stone room lined with dark wood shelves and chained manuscripts, your excitement hits a wall. Literally, because there's a book you can't touch. You notice it immediately, resting on a pedestal like it's auditioning for a sacred relic showcase. It's huge, leather-bound, and glints faintly in the candlelight. Gold leaf decorates its cover. The edges shimmer like someone dusted it in powdered holiness. It doesn't just sit there. It looms. You feel its presence in your bones. And beside it, a rope barrier. A sign in Latin you can't read, but intuitively understand as, don't even think about it, novice. Brother Librarian sees you looking and narrows his eyes. He's the sort of man who knows exactly how many times each book has been touched since 1134. He hands you a less glamorous text, something dull, worn, and crumbly, probably a list of theological vegetables. You cradle it like a soggy kitten. That forbidden book, though, you want it. You ache for it. Historically, monasteries protected their most valuable texts like dragon-guarded treasure. Illuminated manuscripts, painstakingly hand-copied, adorned with precious metals and pigments made from crushed beetles or rare stones, were often locked up or displayed solely for senior monks. Some weren't even read anymore. They were venerated. And now, your quirky tidbit? Certain monasteries had books so rare that monks were required to kiss the cover before handling them, as both reverence and a gentle moisture warning. You're not kidding. Reverent germs for the glory of God. You settle in at a bench. The library is cold and quiet, save for the occasional flick of a page or the subtle sigh of a bored monk 3 tables over. You try to focus on your assigned reading, which appears to be a 200-page analysis of acceptable penance for improper belt knotting. Riveting. But your eyes keep drifting back to the book. What's in it? Psalms written in lapis lazuli? Apocalypse illustrations with monsters riding dragons on golden waves? A recipe for better lentils? You'll never know. Historians still argue whether these exclusive volumes were meant to preserve sacred knowledge
Or just reinforce strict monastic hierarchies by keeping all the cool stuff out of reach. You try to concentrate. Brother Librarian walks past, peeks at your page, and grunts approvingly. You're halfway through a paragraph on fasting protocol when your eyes glaze over. Again, the forbidden book calls to you like a siren covered in vellum. You don't touch it. You wouldn't dare. But your soul gives it a slow-motion mental high five. Someday. Maybe in your 10th year of monkhood. Maybe never. But the dream lives. For now, you go back to your assigned reading, sighing like a man who's just found out dessert tonight is more silence.
You've spent the morning buried in theological texts that could cure insomnia on contact. So when Brother Anayan wordlessly gestures for you to follow him outside, you nearly cry with relief. Sunlight, air, movement, anything that isn't a 14th century treatise on the moral implications of yawn suppression. He leads you around the far side of the cloister, past the pig pen, mildly aromatic, and into the monastery's herb garden. It's beautiful in its own chaotic way. Raised beds tangled with greenery, crooked rows of turnips and garlic, bees lazily buzzing through lavender and thyme. You weed, Brother Anayan says, handing you a rusted trowel with the gravity of a knight bestowing a sword. You nod solemnly. He disappears. And now it's just you, the weeds, and what looks like a very angry goose in the corner eyeing you like you owe it money. You kneel in the dirt and get to work. The soil is crumbly, the air crisp. It's not so bad, honestly. There's a calming rhythm to yanking things out of the ground, like reverse farming for the soul. Historically, monks didn't just pray and copy books. They were also some of the most accomplished gardeners of their time. Monastery herb gardens weren't just for seasoning bland food. They were the foundation of medieval medicine. Sage, hyssop, rue, comfrey, pennyroyal, all cultivated not for flavor, but healing, or, depending on the dosage, hallucination. You reach for a fuzzy-looking leaf when a voice behind you says, "That one's for nosebleeds." You jump. It's Brother Gerwin, the monastery's herbalist. He's ancient, smells faintly of vinegar, and is holding a jar filled with something green and pulpy. "Moss," he says proudly, shaking the jar. "Also good for sore throats and evil spirits." You smile awkwardly and nod. He nods back and disappears into a shed that definitely wasn't there a moment ago. Today's quirky tidbit. Medieval monks believed in some truly creative cures. Toothache? Burn a mouse and sniff it. Melancholy? Rub crushed poppy seeds into your belly while chanting Psalm 32. Sore feet? A goose feather, vinegar, and one Hail Mary, in that order. You pluck a few weeds, start to find a rhythm, and then bees. A cluster hums past your head like a living caution sign. You freeze. The angry goose flaps a little, clearly amused. Turns out part of garden duty includes checking on the hives, which are artfully arranged along the far stone wall. Brother Anayan returns, looking pleased, and points at a hive. You check honey. Oh, great. You tiptoe toward the hive like you're diffusing a bomb. The bees are surprisingly chill, possibly more monk-like than some monks, to be honest. You lift the lid with shaking hands. Sticky gold glistens inside. Historians still argue whether monastic beekeeping was an act of ecological stewardship or just the earliest example of a community desperate for something, anything, sweet. You gather a tiny bit of honey on a wooden stick, seal the hive, and exhale like a champion. Brother Anayan nods and gestures toward the moss pile. You sigh. Nosebleeds and bees. Just another day in the garden of faith.
You're wiping bee residue off your hands with a scratchy cloth that was definitely not made for wiping anything when the bell tolls again. This one longer, lower, almost theatrical. Brother Anian freezes mid-goose stare and gestures with 2 fingers.
Visitors. Visitors? Your pulse quickens. The word feels forbidden, like someone just whispered festival or meet. You haven't seen a non-monk in what feels like several centuries. You'd forgotten other people even existed. You're shepherded quickly to the edge of the cloister, where a group of weary-looking pilgrims is filing through the outer gate, muddy, sunburnt, wrapped in cloaks that look like they've seen battle and bar fights. They carry satchels, staffs, and the faint aura of someone who spent too long sleeping outdoors. You feel like a kid peeking out the window at trick-or-treaters you're not allowed to talk to. And that's not far off, because here's the first rule of monastery hospitality. It exists, but not for you. Pilgrims are to be received with kindness by someone designated to speak, feed, and tend to them. But as a novice, you're not allowed to speak to them, or look too long, or breathe too enthusiastically in their general direction. Historically, monasteries were seen as safe havens along pilgrimage routes, offering food, a place to rest, and sometimes healing. It was a sacred duty, but the monks themselves, especially the less seasoned ones, were meant to remain cloistered, separated. Spiritual focus, after all, doesn't mix well with tales of taverns and dancing and women who weren't fictional martyrs. You stand to the side with the other novices, silently pretending to be part of the stonework. You sneak glances, of course. One pilgrim is telling a dramatic story, arms waving, eyes wide. You can't hear him, but it looks fun. Another's holding a small bundle wrapped in cloth. A relic? A lunch? A baby? You'll never know. Brother Clement approaches with a large basket of bread, real bread from the monastery's reserved stash, fresh, soft, with color. The pilgrims get the good stuff. You feel both charitable and bitter. Mostly bitter. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some monasteries were so strict that monks had designated porter monks who handled all visitor interaction. These monks were trained in manners, theology, and probably eye contact avoidance. Everyone else expected to vanish like mist the moment an outsider crossed the threshold. A small child from the pilgrim group strays towards you, big-eyed and curious. You panic. What's the hand signal for, "Hello, I can't speak to you, but your cloak is adorable"? Before you can act, Brother Theobald appears like a shadow and gently turns the child back around, whispering something that sounds holy, but is definitely, "Don't engage with the wool ones." Historians still argue whether this separation from the outside world was spiritually protective or just a masterclass in manufactured loneliness. As the pilgrims are led inside for their temporary shelter, you turn away, back towards the cloister. Your world shrinks again to stone corridors, bells, and strict routines. But that glimpse, those muddy, smiling faces lingers. Somewhere out there is a world of laughter and chaos and garlic. But not for you. Not yet.
The pilgrims are safely stowed in the guest wing, sealed behind thick wooden doors and a level of hospitality you're legally not allowed to witness. You, on the other hand, have been rerouted to kitchen duty. Again. Your dreams of relics and relic-related mysteries are dashed the moment you're handed a bucket of root vegetables and told to scrub like the soul depends on it, which apparently it does. You move into the stone kitchen, which is a wonder of medieval engineering and minor trauma. Massive cauldrons bubble over open hearths. Wooden spoons the size of oars lean against soot-blackened walls. The ceiling beams are streaked with smoke, and everything smells like garlic, wet ash, and turnips. So many turnips. But what catches your eye isn't the soup or the oddly knife-happy Brother Hugo. It's the door. In the far corner of the kitchen, nearly hidden behind a sack of onions and a hanging row of smoked herbs, there's a small wooden door, reinforced with iron, locked tight. You glance around. No one else seems to acknowledge it. Not the cook, not the helpers, not even the goose currently glaring at a stew pot with suspicion. You point toward it, casually, like someone admiring firewood placement. Brother Hugo grunts. Off limits. That's it. No explanation, no warning. Just two words that somehow carry the weight of a medieval Netflix cliffhanger. Off limits. Historically, many monasteries had restricted cellars or storage rooms, often beneath the kitchens or chapels. These might hold preserved food, sacred relics, emergency wine casks, or even the remains of especially venerated brothers. Some believe secret tunnels led from these cellars to distant chapels or escape routes. Others think they just stored cheese and preferred a little mystery. And now for your quirky tidbit. In a few rare cases, monasteries kept fermentation chambers down in these basements, not just for wine, but for ancient brews, medicinal tinctures, or one very real attempt at walnut ink that stained a monk's hands black for a month. It's still noted in the margins of the infirmary log. You keep peeling, but you're thinking about the door, about what's behind it. Relics? Wine? Some poor novice who asked too many questions? Historians still argue whether these sealed cellars were sacred, secret, or just too smelly to visit regularly. Later, after dinner, you sneak a peek during dishwashing. The door is still there, still locked. You step closer. Just one step. You reach out. The iron feels cold, old, maybe even holy. Or maybe that's just what your brain tells you to justify this entirely unauthorized curiosity. Before you can touch the handle, Brother Hugo appears behind you like a ghost in a smoke cloud. He says nothing, just looks at you. You instantly recall every chant you've ever mungled. You back away, slowly, respectfully, silently. He nods. You don't sleep well that night, not because of the straw mattress or the cold stone or the distant snoring of someone with intense sinus issues. No, it's the door. Locked. Unknown. Calling. You're starting to understand why monks need so much prayer.
You wake up feeling not fresh, more like fermented. There's a film of sweat, straw, and penance clinging to you. Your robe smells like yesterday's compost pile, and your feet are developing a suspicious crunch. It's not that you're ungrateful, you're just ripe. You've reached that point in the monastic cycle known unofficially as the hygiene reckoning. Today, mercifully, or ominously, you're directed toward the lavatorium. Not the fancy Roman kind with mosaics and heated floors. No, this is a long, drafty stone room with a gutter down the center, a row of hand basins carved into the wall, and a smell that says we gave up centuries ago. You dip your hands into the basin. The water is icy, as always, and something floats by that may or may not be a leaf, or a penitent's toe skin. Who knows? You wash your face anyway. It helps. Sort of. Then comes the real moment of truth. Bathing. Now, before you get too excited, understand that full-body bathing in a medieval monastery is less of a ritual and more of a rumor. Once a month, maybe. Twice if you're extremely sinful or extremely smelly. And today, it seems, you've won the grimy lottery. You're led to the bathhouse, really just a separate room with a stone basin large enough to sit in. Someone's heated a bit of water over the fire and poured it in. The result is lukewarmish, milky gray, suspicious. You strip, wincing as your robe peels away like a wet bandage from your skin. You stepped into the water, trying not to think about the last dozen people who bathed here. The basin is shallow. You crouch. The experience is part cold therapy, part soul excavation. Historically, monks weren't obsessed with cleanliness, not in the modern sense. The rule of St. Benedict barely mentions bathing, and many orders believed the body was a sinful distraction, best left humbled. That said, cleanliness was encouraged for health and dignity, especially for communal harmony, which makes sense. Nothing says holy brotherhood like someone smelling aggressively of onions and damp wool. Now for your fringe tidbit. Some monastic bathhouses used herbs and ashes instead of soap, rosemary to mask the scent, and lye ash for scrubbing. Which sounds fine until you realize lye can also strip skin if misused. You scrub gently, just in case. A breeze creeps under the door. You shiver. You rinse. You try not to focus on the sound of someone outside humming a psalm while waiting their turn. Historians still argue whether infrequent bathing was a sign of piety or just a logistical surrender to the fact that heating water in large quantities is the devil's work. You dry off with a piece of cloth so thin it's basically theoretical, then redress in the same robe. It's less itchy now, slightly. Or maybe you're just numb. Later at Vespers, you catch a faint whiff of something that almost smells like rosemary. You glance at Brother Thomas. He nods approvingly. Is that respect? Or is he just glad you no longer reek of goats and parchment glue? Either way, you're clean. For now. You're helping Brother Elric in the kitchen this afternoon, peeling yet another endless mountain of root vegetables that all somehow taste like punishment when it happens. A sound. A loud, wet, echoing sound. Heads turn, monks freeze. Somewhere near the far table, Brother Anselm goes very, very still. Then gurgle, blorp, thwump. Brother Anselm drops to the ground like a sack of barley, groaning dramatically. For a moment, no one moves. Then total chaos. Monastic chaos, of course, which means lots of wide eyes, hurried shuffling, and whispered Latin. Turns out, Brother Anselm made the rookie mistake of indulging in something called fermented bean paste. Not exactly a sin, but also not ideal. Apparently, he'd been storing it for medicinal purposes in a clay jar hidden behind the woodpile. No one questioned this until his digestive tract decided to stage a live performance of The Wrath of Lentils. Historically, medieval monasteries had to be self-sustaining, which meant food preservation was serious business. Fermenting, drying, salting, these weren't hobbies, they were survival. But sometimes things went awry. Add in a vow of silence, and digestive distress became a kind of spiritual crisis with a soundscape. You help carry Brother Anselm to the infirmary. It's not far, but every few steps he lets out a groan that sounds like someone gargling in Latin. His face is greenish, his eyes are wild. Brother Oswin, the infirmarian, clucks sympathetically and starts mixing a brew of honey, vinegar, and something black that wiggles. You politely excuse yourself. Your quirky tidbit for the day? Some monasteries believed in gas expulsion as a form of demonic release. Yes, if you had indigestion, it might not be poor food hygiene, it might be Satan. There are records, actual records, of monks burping, or worse, and then thanking God for delivering them from evil. That's commitment. Brother Anselm mumbled something about feeling the presence of St. Jude in his lower intestine. You nod, supportively. Then sprint outside and take a deep breath of fresh air, because you are not spiritually strong enough to watch someone vomit into a bucket while praising divine purification. Historians still argue whether medieval food storage practices were genuinely advanced or just a long-running experiment in survival disguised as piety. Back in the kitchen, Brother Elric leans over and mutters the rarest of monastic sentences. We might not serve beans tomorrow. You nearly weep. At Compline, Brother Anselm is noticeably absent. You're told he's resting, sipping a mug of medicinal broth and whispering penitential psalms between stomach convulsions. Brother Oswin insists it's just a brief imbalance of humors. You lie awake in your cell that night, clutching your robe, stomach rumbling in solidarity. Was that lentil stew fermented too? You won't know. You only know one thing. You will never trust a jar buried behind the woodpile again.
By the next morning, Brother Anselm has become a legend. Word travels fast in a silent monastery
through glances, sighs, and the uniquely expressive art of eyebrow semaphore. You pass two monks who give each other a very subtle, not the beans look. Even Brother Malachi raises a single brow in a gesture that might translate to, "This is why we only ferment on feast days." But today, your concern is more personal, because you don't feel right. Not full-blown Anselm-style digestive apocalypse, but something is definitely off. Your head is light, your limbs are heavy. You try to chant during louds, but your mouth won't keep up with your brain. Or maybe it's the other way around. Either way, you start leaning just a little too far forward on the choir stall and nearly faceplant into the Book of Psalms. The abbot notices. Minutes later, you're escorted gently but firmly to the infirmary. This sounds dramatic, but remember, monks aren't supposed to make a scene, especially not in prayer. So they act like they're just repositioning you. One monk holds your arm, another carries your robe's hem. It's like a sickly parade floating starring you and your dangerously uncooperative blood pressure. The infirmary is a narrow chamber tucked away behind the herb garden. It smells of thyme, lavender, vinegar, and resolve. Brother Oswin greets you with his usual energy, warm, quiet, and mildly intimidating. He motions for you to sit on a low cot stuffed with something that crunches, possibly straw, possibly dried onion peels. You don't ask. He peers into your eyes, feels your pulse, and nods gravely. "Too much cold," he says. You nod, as though that explains everything. He mixes a concoction of herbs, honey, and what smells suspiciously like candle wax. You sip it. It's bitter. You regret everything. Historically, monastic infirmaries were the medical centers of their time. Monks kept detailed records of symptoms, treatments, and outcomes. They used herbal remedies, poultices, compresses, and an impressive amount of prayer. The rule of Benedict emphasized care for the sick. Before all things and above all things, care must be taken of the sick, which is noble, unless you're the sick one. And now for your quirky tidbit. Some monks believe that singing psalms aloud while applying mustard plasters increased healing. Whether through spiritual vibrations or simply distracting the patient with mild vocal exertion and moderate chest burning is still unclear. You lie back. Brother Oswin applies a warm compress to your forehead. It smells like sage and boiled regret. He hums softly, Gregorian, of course. Not comforting, exactly, but rhythmically bleak, which fits your current vibe. Historians still argue whether monastic medical care was pioneering for its time or just guesswork dressed in Latin with a mortar and pestle. You're told to rest. You sleep briefly, dreaming of roasted leeks and clean sheets. When you wake, Brother Oswin feeds you thin broth, recites Psalm 91, and places a dried apple slice on your chest for balance. You're not sure if it's spiritual, nutritional, or just storage.
You make it to Vespers upright and unexploded, which, given recent events, feels like a personal triumph. You even manage to chant the Magnificat without drifting into daydreams about ginger tea and dry linens. But once the service ends and the great silence descends again, you walk the cloister in slow circles, robe flapping slightly, mind wandering far beyond the stone walls. Because lately, more often than you'd care to admit, you've been having escape fantasies. Nothing dramatic. You don't imagine fleeing on horseback through torch-lit forests or scaling the monastery wall with a rope made of braided cinctures. No, your fantasies are subtler, slipping out the gate, wandering down the road, buying bread from a real bakery, eating it while talking, maybe even sitting down on a chair with back support. You pass Brother Matthias in the corridor. He's ancient, bent like an overcooked spoon, and yet his eyes are sharp as vinegar. As you walk past, he catches your gaze and, impossibly, winks. It's so unexpected you nearly trip over your own hem. Did he read your mind? Was he once like you, a novice with thoughts of warm beds and barmaids and the blessed sound of shoes that aren't wooden? Historically, monks did occasionally leave. Some slipped away in the night. Some were granted release by their abbot. Others didn't survive long enough to regret anything. But many, despite the cold, the hunger, and the eternal turnips, stayed. Why? Maybe discipline, maybe fear, maybe because once you've memorized all 150 psalms, you figure you might as well write it out. And here's your quirky tidbit. One monastery reportedly installed a second wall around the dormitories, not to keep people out, but to keep novices in. Nothing says holy enclosure like architectural mistrust. You keep walking, lost in thoughts of the outside world. You imagine a tavern, a fire, a soft chair, someone laughing loudly without shame, a steaming bowl of stew that doesn't come with spiritual implications. You imagine Wi-Fi. That's when you know you've gone too far. You sit on a bench and stare up at the stars peeking through the cloister arches. You think of the routines, the hours, the silence, the prayers. You think of Brother Anselm's bean-related collapse and your own feverish episode with sage compresses and psalm humming. And you realize every monk here has probably had the same thoughts. Maybe not about Wi-Fi, sure, but about leaving. And maybe, just maybe, Brother Matthias's wink wasn't about rebellion at all. Maybe it was the most monkish way of saying, you're not alone. Historians still argue whether monastic retention was a testament to unwavering devotion or a lack of better options on the outside involving hot water and appropriate footwear. You head back to your cell, body tired but mind surprisingly still. The stone beneath your feet doesn't feel quite so heavy tonight. You close your eyes, robe still dusty from the garden, scalp still chilled from the tonsure breeze. You're here. For now.
The next morning begins like every other. Before the sun, before the warmth, before your brain has any say in the matter. The bell rings, you rise, you chant. Your knees protest, your back joins in. It's just the usual medieval misery. Until it happens. You're deep in a line of psalms during prime, trying your best to hit the right syllables without sounding like a Gregorian lawnmower, when something crawls up your nose. Not metaphorically, literally. Dust, maybe? A floating fragment of wool? A divine test in particle form. Whatever it is, it tickles your sinuses with all the subtlety of a hay bale. Your eyes water, your breath hitches. You try to hold it in, you really do, but the sneeze comes. Violent, echoing, undeniable. It ricochets off the chapel walls like a trumpet of unholy war. Brother Hubert flinches, Brother Felix gasps, a candle goes out, probably from fear, and you, frozen in mid-sneeze posture, realize something dreadful. You may have just committed accidental blasphemy. Silence falls, thicker than usual. Monastic silence is generally peaceful, reverent. This is different. This is accusatory. You feel 40 heads turn in slow motion. You stare at the floor, cheeks burning, soul quietly packing its bags. Historically, monks weren't expected to suppress every bodily function, but timing was everything. To interrupt a prayer with noise, even an innocent one, was frowned upon. Some monastic rules called for extra penance if you caused distraction. One poor soul in Cluny was allegedly forced to copy 3 entire psalters after burping mid-kneel. You stare at the abbot. He stares back. He blinks. Then he returns to chanting. That's it. You exhale, slowly, regretfully. But you're not off the hook. After prayers, you're pulled aside by Brother Theobald, keeper of all things rule-related. He speaks in a whisper barely above dust. Reverence must be total, even in nasal matters. Your punishment? Copying and memorizing the entire Psalm 119, the longest in the book. Every verse, all 176 of them. Here's your quirky tidbit. Psalm 119 is an acrostic poem, each section corresponding to a letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It's long, repetitive, and strangely beautiful, if you're not copying it with frozen fingers and a guilty conscience. You spend the rest of your day hunched in the scriptorium, scratching out verse after verse, the words statutes, precepts, and decrees repeating so often you start to wonder if you're being spiritually hypnotized. Historians still argue whether these minor infractions and their exaggerated punishments were meant to discipline the flesh or just keep everyone too busy to ever sneeze again. By nightfall, your wrist is numb, your eyes twitching, and you're 23 verses in. You haven't sneezed again, not even close. Your nose wouldn't dare. As you trudge back to your cell, you catch Brother Felix watching you with the look of someone who's been there. He nods once. Bless you.
You wake up, buzzing. Not with energy, of course, let's not be ridiculous. You're still exhausted, underfed, and haunted by Psalm 119, which now appears in your dreams written in lentils. But buzzing in your mind. Your thoughts are racing, your imagination's on fire, and the monastery walls feel especially suffocating today. You stumble into lauds, eyes barely open, lips automatically forming syllables you no longer consciously register. But your brain? It's gone rogue. Because in your head, you're not in a choir stall. You're dancing to music with tempo. There's beatboxing involved, probably a lute drop. And yes, you're choreographing a medieval-themed TikTok trend about monastic breakfast. You even imagine Brother Malachi doing a stiff robot move in his robe. It's glorious. And then it hits you. This is a sin. A flagrant, dance-infused, imagination-driven, twitching in your seat kind of sin. You've committed the monastic cardinal error of indulging in unholy daydreams. Historically, monks were constantly on guard against distractions of the mind. The rule of St. Benedict doesn't leave room for mental detours. Monks were taught to rein in wandering thoughts through discipline, prayer, and sometimes even, yes, self-flagellation, because nothing says focus like mild corporal persuasion. Your thoughts spiral. You imagine what would happen if someone caught you moonwalking between the refectory and the garden. You wonder if Brother Theobald can sense imagination through walls. You think of the tonsure spinning like a fidget spinner as you break dance by the scriptorium fire. You clap your hands together suddenly, as if trapping the thought like a mosquito. The monk beside you flinches. You smile sheepishly. He bows his head and scoots a few inches away, probably assuming you're being attacked by invisible demons. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some monks wore belts with small spiked chains tucked discreetly inside, pressing into their skin whenever they moved too freely. A wearable guilt reminder. Imagine a Fitbit, but for self-reprimanding. You contemplate this and decide instead to internally flagellate. That means turning every impure thought into a whispered apology. Every mental flash of rhythm or spice or, gasp, cheese, another Kyrie eleison. You resume chanting,
You focus on the flicker of the candle. You repeat over and over. The mind is a corridor. Let the thoughts pass through it. Do not offer them tea. Historians still argue whether mental suppression in monasteries helped foster spiritual purity or created a deeply creative class of repressed theater kids in robes. You make it through the prayers. Barely. At breakfast, you chew your bread slowly, silently reciting the lamest part of Psalm 119 to counteract your earlier sins. I will meditate on your precepts and fix my eyes on your ways. Sure, you're saying that, but mentally, you're still teaching Brother Thomas how to floss. By the time you return to your cell, your brain has calmed. A little. You sit cross-legged, fold your hands, and stare at the wall like it holds the secrets to spiritual peace. But somewhere deep inside, the rhythm lingers. Even holiness can't kill the beat.
You drag yourself into the final hours of the day with the grace of a sack of turnips. Your legs ache. Your fingers are stained with ink, moss, and maybe something unidentifiable from the kitchen. Your eyes burn from candle smoke and the kind of spiritual fatigue that makes the idea of eternity sound like a scheduling concern. Compline has ended. The great silence has settled like fog through the cloister. And now, blessedly, finally, you are permitted to collapse into your cot. You reach your cell, that little monastic closet of stone and straw that you've come to appreciate in the way one might come to appreciate a cave during a thunderstorm. Not because it's comfortable, but because it's yours. Sort of. You sit down on the edge of your mattress, if you can call it that, and exhale a sigh so long and weary it feels like it's been aging in your lungs all day. The straw crackles beneath you. The wool blanket is rough but warm. The air smells like old parchment, smoke, and a hint of mildew, which, weirdly, has become comforting. And there it is again, the stone, that cold slab beneath your thin straw mat. It's always there, unforgiving, solid, but familiar now. You shift slightly, and for the first time it actually feels, dare you say it, softish. Not because it is, of course, but because you've changed. Your body has surrendered. Your expectations have lowered to subterranean depths. You pull the blanket up and curl beneath it, limbs folding in with the elegance of a tired dog. Outside, a soft breeze rustles the ivy along the outer wall. Somewhere, a bell creaks on its hook, just once, like it's reminding you to sleep fast, because tomorrow is already tapping its foot. Historically, monks ended each day with compline prayers and the singing of the Salve Regina. They would then retire to their cells under strict silence, reflecting on mortality and their daily failings. Some even kept skulls in their rooms, memento mori, gentle reminders that life is fleeting and lentils are forever. Today's quirky tidbit? In some abbeys, monks were required to sleep in their robes, cinctures and all, so they'd be ready to leap from bed at the midnight bell. That's right, sleep preparedness penance. No comfy pajamas, just itchy layers and an unspoken race against spiritual sluggishness. You lie there, half wrapped in wool, staring at the low ceiling. You've chanted, gardened, scraped, confessed, and nearly sneezed your way into exile. You've tasted the mysteries of gray stew, experienced the scandal of forbidden cellars, and imagined Brother Malachi doing a moonwalk. And now, finally, you are horizontal. Historians still argue whether the monastic life brought divine clarity or simply taught men how to function on 2 hours of sleep and infinite patience. Your eyelids grow heavy. The silence is deep, almost sacred. No one moves, no one speaks. Even your thoughts slow down
easing into the rhythm of stillness. You shift slightly. The stone floor sighs. And you fall asleep, thinking, maybe a last one more day.
You awaken just before the bell, your body now trained like some ancient monastic dog to anticipate the clang before it strikes. The chapel's chill waits for you like an old, unwelcome friend. But for a few blessed moments you remain in the stillness, tangled in your coarse blanket, heart beating slow, eyes blinking against the grainy gray of another pre-dawn hour. Your knees ache. Your back is a woven tapestry of knots and creaks. But strangely, you don't hate it. Not entirely. You sit up, bones cracking like a liturgical percussion section, and stand. The robe clings to you like a mildly resentful sheep. You shuffle toward the chapel with the others, moving as one, a sleepwalking congregation of wool, humility, and barely suppressed joint pain. The final prayer session of the day begins, though, if we're being honest, time has become meaningless here. It could be yesterday or last Lent. The candles flicker, the psalms chant themselves. You know them now. Not because you studied, but because they imprinted themselves onto your soul like spiritual malware. As you kneel, again, you glance to your right. Brother Anselm, back from his fermented ordeal, offers you the briefest of nods. You nod back. The circle is complete. Historically, this rhythm was by design. Endless repetition to break down the ego, to refocus the mind, to create space for the divine to slip quietly into the ordinary. Prayer wasn't a moment, it was a condition. Monks didn't just do devotion, they became it. Your quirky tidbit? In some monasteries, monks recorded how often they nodded off during prayer, not to be punished, but to log how the devil of drowsiness attacked their spiritual vigilance. Some even made personal charts, like saintly sleep diaries, complete with candle burn estimates and margin doodles. You finish chanting. Your voice is hoarse but steady. As you rise, something shifts. Not dramatically, but enough. Your knees complain a little less. Your stomach grumbles with more familiarity than resentment. And as you return to your cell, you feel it. This life hasn't become easier. You've just stopped expecting it to be. You lie down once more on the familiar straw. The stone beneath you is unchanged, but it's yours now, or you belong to it. Either way, it doesn't matter. Outside, the wind taps softly against the shutters. Inside, you breathe deeply. The silence is no longer an absence. It's a shape, a shelter. Sleep comes not with resistance, but welcome. You've made it. You probably wouldn't survive another week, mind you. But a day? You did that. And tomorrow? That's a problem for future you.
And now, here you are, back beneath your blanket, the gentle hum of night slowly folding over your shoulders. The chapel is quiet. The bells have gone still. No chants, no scraping parchment, just you and the fading echo of monastic silence. Breathe in and let it out slowly. The monastery still hums somewhere in the corners of your mind, with its cold stones and warm candles, its harsh rhythms and soft rituals. You can still feel the weight of the robe, the roughness of straw beneath your ribs, the distant clang of duty pulling you from the edges of sleep. But now, that world is drifting behind you. You've seen its devotion, its discipline, its drudgery. You've trudged through icy corridors, whispered apologies to carrots, and fantasized about cheese like it was forbidden treasure. And yet, somehow, you made it. You kneeled. You served. You sneezed at the worst possible moment, and you learned something important. That sometimes spiritual clarity doesn't arrive in lightning bolts or revelations, but in the soft, stubborn endurance
of one more gray morning. So as you close your eyes, let your body sink deeper into your bed, your own familiar cot, not made of straw, hopefully, and let the hush of that medieval world fall away. You're home now. You're warm. You're safe. And best of all, nobody's ringing a bell. End of script. Sweet dreams.